the National Archives podcast series, A Momentous Question, Decorating the Victorian Home, presented by Julie Halls.
Good afternoon everyone, my name's Julie Halls and I work in the Modern Domestic Records team here at the National Archives. Today's talk will be about interior design in the Victorian period, using examples from the National Archives' collection of registered designs to illustrate the changing styles and approaches to decorating the home. I'll talk about the social and economic factors that led to the rise in interest in the decorative arts in the 19th century, such as increasing affluence, especially among the middle classes, changing ideas about what the home signified, and the mass manufacture of decorative goods. Next, we'll look at the factors that led to the creation of the registered designs. These include concerns about piracy of designs and also about the quality of British design and the inability of British decorative goods to compete in the markets. The main section of the talk will be about the design reform movement, the efforts of Henry Cole and his circle to change public taste, and the work of the other key figures associated with design reform. We'll see how, despite the efforts in the 1840s and 1850s to dictate what constituted good design, ideas about design constantly changed and evolved. I won't attempt to talk about every kind of home and interior at every level of society. That would be too huge an area to cover, but instead I'll try to give a broad overview of the main developments. For many of us, Victorian design conjures up an image like this one, a painting by Frith called Many Happy Returns of the Day. We picture over-elaborate, over-furnished interiors with mahogany furniture, plush curtains, dark walls and heavily patterned carpets. In reality though, design at this period was very varied and changed hugely between the beginning and end of Victoria's reign. A number of factors came together to cause a huge interest in interior design. Perhaps the most important was the rise in disposable income for a large part of the population, resulting in an ever more affluent middle class. Britain was the wealthiest nation in the world with its colonies and industrial dominance, and the professional and merchant classes were wealthier than they had ever been. The middle classes were divided into numerous strata, and below them in terms of wealth were the vast majority of the nation's population, the manual workers and their families who comprised the working class. As in the middle classes, there were many overlapping hierarchies. Not surprisingly, the poorer classes spent a lot of their income on housing and food, but even in the poorest households, status was marked by the ability to possess goods. However, the obsession with good taste within the home was broadly a middle-class preoccupation. The quote in the title of the talk comes from the Journal of Design and Manufactures in 1850, which described the appropriate decoration and furnishing of dwellings as a momentous question. As we'll see, the question of taste was a matter of intense discussion and debate, and people were anxious that their homes should be a reflection of their social status. Spending on decorative goods was a matter of keeping up appearances. Items of clothing, furniture, and interior decoration were associated with class in all its gradations, and people were expected to show evidence of good taste. It was a fraught area. The influential lifestyle writer Mary Stickney Ellis thought it scarcely necessary to point out the loss of character and influence occasioned by living below our station. At the same time, trying too hard could lead to disapproval. In George Gissing's book New Grub Street, the home of a character living in one of the new suburbs of London is described as a small house and rather showily than handsomely furnished. No one after visiting it would be astonished to hear that Mrs. Edmund Yule had but a small income and that she was often put to desperate expedients to keep up the gloss of easy circumstances. The advice book writer Jane Ellen Panton stated the situation plainly, advising, "In starting to buy the furniture, let us consider not what is handsome or effective or taking to the eye, but what is suitable to the husband's position." According to Mrs. Panton, even the decor of the hallway could make or break a potential friendship. If well decorated, it would disclose immediately to the eyes of the caller that here is the abode of people who care for their home, and who thus denote that they are worth cultivating, for no doubt they will turn out to be desirable friends. Moral values came to be attached to the decoration of the home. For example, extravagance was immoral and thrift was moral. It was best to know one's place and live accordingly. A second reason for the huge market for decorative items was the development of what could be called a cult of the home. As well as having greater disposable income, the Victorians began to separate their world into the public sphere of work and trade and a private sphere of home life and domesticity. Following the Industrial Revolution, home came increasingly to be thought of as a refuge. More and more work was moving outside the home. For example, piecework, which was produced at home, changed to factory work, and professionals such as doctors and lawyers now tended to work in offices. Women who had helped their husbands in their work were now separated from where this took place and became housewives instead. Those who could afford to moved to the suburbs, away from the cities where they worked, so that for many women the home became the main focus of their existence. A woman was expected to become what Dickens termed in his book Edwin Drood, a ministering angel to domestic bliss. This well-known painting by Holman Hunt, The Awakening Conscience, shows a kept woman who has suddenly seen the error of her ways. To Victorian eyes, the furnishings would have seemed very bright and new, and the room quite vulgar in that it contained all the new fashions of that time. This made it obvious that it had been set up for a mistress and was not a family home. A strange element in a period so devoted to the idea of progress was that new often equalled bad. Commenting on this painting, the critic John Ruskin said that everything in it showed a fatal newness, and nothing had the old thoughts of home upon it. The decoration of the interior underlined the immorality of the woman's situation. A well-kept house was also a reflection of moral rectitude. Our friend Mrs. Panton was quite certain that when people care for their homes, they are much better in every way, mentally and morally, than those who only regard them as places to eat and sleep in. The cat playing with a bird under the table and the sheet music on the floor are indications that this is not a well-cared-for home. A third cause of the rise in the consumption of decorative items was industrialization. The mass production of goods had really taken off, flooding the markets with a huge variety of cheap products, catering to all levels of society. Britain led the world in manufacturing, particularly in unfinished goods made using coal and steam, like iron and steel products and cotton yarn and cloth, much of which were exported to less developed countries. However, there was a problem, and that was that we were unable to compete in the markets for goods that depended on skilled designers and craftsmen, like ceramics, glassware and furniture, in fact all the decorative arts. The French in particular were seen to have greatly superior taste and highly skilled craftsmen, whereas the British were churning out poorly designed goods on a huge scale. There was a fear that as France caught up with British manufacturing skills, it would overtake the markets completely. Machine production also exacerbated another problem, the piracy of designs. One of the earliest industries to be affected was the textile industry. Technical advances meant that cotton production increased hugely from the 1760s onwards. Producing a design on a commercial scale only to have it pirated could mean huge financial losses for manufacturers, and piracy increased as demand for printed textiles grew. As we can see from this slide, a plethora of styles were being produced at this time, and it was a period of revivals. Rococo, Renaissance, Gothic and Classical styles were all popular and were sometimes combined in the same item. Here we can see a Rococo revival chair, a Gothic jug, what's described as an Alhambra plate, which became known as the Moorish style, and a Tudor-style sideboard. This was known as the Kenilworth Buffet and was displayed at the Great Exhibition of 1851. It's now on display at Warwick Castle. It was growing concern about the quality of British design and about piracy of designs that led to the creation of the design records at the National Archives. In 1835, a select committee was set up to inquire into the best means of extending a knowledge of the arts and of the principles of design among the people, especially the manufacturing population of the country, and to inquire into the constitution, management and effects of institutions connected with the arts. It concluded that the causes of the problem were increasing mechanisation, so that quantity increased at the expense of quality. We led the world in manufacturing techniques, but were churning out all sorts of rubbish. Another problem was seen to be poor taste on the part of the general public, fed by increasing affluence, the availability of cheap goods, constantly changing fashions, and a lack of opportunities to see examples of good taste. And piracy of designs was also blamed for the problems. Manufacturers were reluctant to invest in skilled designers when their work would be copied almost immediately and the copies sold more cheaply. In 1836, the report of the Select Committee made 3 key recommendations. Museums and galleries should be established where the general public could go to see examples of good design. They hoped that exposure to examples of good taste would encourage consumers to demand better designs. Schools of design should be set up where artisans could go to be educated and trained to recognise and produce better designs. And a copyright system should be established for all ornamental designs, similar to the one that already existed in France. There was a generally held belief that the problems in the markets could be solved through aesthetic reform. The Government School of Design, now the Royal College of Art, was set up in Kensington in 1837 and run by the Board of Trade. After a shaky start, the civil servant and design reformer Henry Cole took over the running of the school, and it became much more successful, with numerous other schools of design set up around the country. The third recommendation, a system of copyright for ornamental designs, was implemented in 1839, which is where the registered designs come into the picture. In 1839, the Designs Registry was set up under the Board of Trade to protect ornamental designs. The records for designs registered under this original Act are in the National Archives Record Series BT 42. In 1842, the period and scope of copyright was extended and 13 material classes were introduced to try to cover all the decorative arts. The classes included earthenware, glassware, wallpapers, metalwork, and various categories of textiles. These records are in the National Archives Record Series BT 43 and BT 44, which cover the period 1842 to 1883, and they're the main set of records we'll be looking at today. A number of other acts followed, including one in 1851 to cover inventions shown in the Great Exhibition. Setting up the Designs Registry was one of the key ways in which reformers hoped to improve the quality of design. The hope was that manufacturers would feel it was worthwhile to spend money on good designers and good designs, safe in the knowledge that they wouldn't be copied straight away. The records consist of registers, which include the allocated registered design number, the name and address of the proprietor, this was the copyright holder, usually a manufacturer or retailer rather than the actual designer, and sometimes a brief description of the object. Along with the registers are books of representations. Proprietors had to provide 2 representations of their design at the time of registration. One they kept and the other would be stamped with the registered design number and retained by the registry. Representations can consist of drawings, paintings, photographs and samples of cloth and wallpaper. These were pasted into leather-bound volumes, many of which are huge and extremely heavy, as you can see from this photo of a volume of wallpaper samples. The paperback is just to give a sense of scale. The records in BT 43 and BT 44 have recently been catalogued online by item, so you can search for designs by registered design number, proprietor, date, address and description. There's a research guide on registered designs on our website that has more information about the various record series. The drive to improve design gave rise to what became known as the design reform movement. Henry Cole, one of the main figures in the movement, lobbied government for support for his campaign to improve standards in industrial design, getting the backing of Prince Albert. In 1840, he collected together ornaments to demonstrate excellence in design and manufacture, to be used to educate students at the School of Design. In 1852, this collection became the Museum of Ornamental Art at Marlborough House, before eventually moving and evolving into the V&A. Cole was hugely influential, but was sometimes criticised for his didactic approach. In the drive to improve the taste of the general public, he put on an exhibition at the museum at Marlborough House called False Principles in Decoration, which became known as the Chamber of Horrors, to illustrate where British manufacturers were going wrong. The chief of vices was the direct imitation of nature, demonstrated by a furniture chintz imitating ribbon and roses on a flat surface and lacking a symmetrical pattern, like the carpet design shown here. Another faux pas was to mix different styles within one design, as in this furniture fabric, which has Spanish bullfighting scenes and a chintz design mixed together, and the wallpaper, which is imitating metal and also has a three-dimensional effect. Decoration of an object should be true to the nature of the object. What appears to be a stuffed fox does not reflect the function of a footstool. The Chamber of Horrors, although very popular, led to great nervousness among homeowners about correct taste, and this fear was much parodied in novels and journals of the time. The registered designs are full of what the design reformers thought of as horrors, and to look through them suggests that flowery wallpaper and carpets never went out of fashion. Ideas about design also changed rapidly, making it hard to know what to choose and giving rise to a huge number of advice manuals and journals, as we saw earlier. These are examples of designs that conform to Henry Cole and his circle's theories of correct taste. The water carafe was designed by the artist Richard Redgrave, who became headmaster of the Government School of Design in 1848 and art superintendent in 1852. It was made for Henry Cole's design company, Felix Summerley's Art Manufactures. The colouring and decoration of water eads was considered appropriate for a water carafe. The wallpaper was designed by Owen Jones, another design reformer, and has the kind of flat geometrical pattern deemed appropriate for a wallpaper. Three-dimensional effects were considered incorrect. Similarly, the tile has a flat pattern and does not attempt to imitate nature like the flowery carpet on the previous slide. The Granville chair was designed by Edward Welby Pugin, the son of Augustus Pugin, now best known for his work with Charles Barry on the Houses of Parliament. The form is simple and functional, and what Pugin regarded as honest. The functional elements are not disguised, but instead are central to the design. The chair clearly shows the link between Augustus Pugin's precepts, which we'll look at next, and those of the arts and crafts movement later in the century. Henry Cole's principles of design didn't impress everyone. The influential critic John Ruskin was offended by the idea of a rule-bound system. He believed that each individual craftsman should get their own inspiration from nature, and as we'll see, many designers formed their own ideas about what constituted good taste. This is an important collection of records, not least in terms of the numbers of examples of the work of most of the leading figures in the design reform movement. These examples are an opportunity to study the designer's work firsthand. The fact that the designs were registered may itself reveal something about their working methods. Pugin was a pioneer of design reform and advocated a revival of the Gothic style, which he associated with a pre-industrial age when craftsmen were valued, society had a clear structure, and Christianity was reflected in everyday life. He believed that a nation's art was a symptom of its moral health. We hold a number of Pugin's designs, including fabrics, carpets and wallpapers. Because registered designs are registered by the copyright holder, usually a manufacturer or retailer, it can be difficult to trace individual designers. It's a bit easier to attribute designs in the case of well-known names because we know which companies they were associated with. Pugin was the first architect and designer to design items for general use by members of the public. He worked with the manufacturer John Crace, as well as the tile company Mintons, who carried on selling his designs long after his death in 1852. This tile was registered by them in 1873 and is very similar to a tile in the British Museum which has been given a probable attribution to Pugin. It bears all his hallmarks, the bird motif, Gothic script and improving motto, Deus providebit, or God will provide. There must have been a companion tile with the rest of the motto on, but this doesn't appear to have been registered. We've been able to give the furniture fabric a definite attribution to Pugin, and a curator from the V&A has confirmed that this wallpaper is also a Pugin design. These examples illustrate his use of medieval motifs and rich decoration. He used flat patterns, believing that creating an illusion of depth was in some way dishonest. His belief that a piece of architecture or design should clearly express its purpose, both symbolically and practically, became a cornerstone of Victorian design reform. The registered designs provide a great opportunity to see not only ideal examples of particular styles, but also the way in which they were popularised and misinterpreted. They are an exceptional resource in this regard, as everyday, often ephemeral material is far less likely to survive than artefacts aimed at a more elite market, which are more likely to have been preserved in museums and galleries. Pugin was mortified by the way his Gothic precepts were misinterpreted. For example, he described wallpapers like this one as what are termed Gothic pattern papers, where a wretched caricature of a pointed building is repeated from the skirting to the cornice in terrible confusion, door over pinnacle, pinnacle over door. However, these wallpapers remained popular and were often used in rooms that were considered the domain of men, like libraries. This jug, known as an apostle jug, was a very popular and affordable item and depicts figures in architectural niches. The Gothic style became all-pervading and became adapted for every kind of item, getting further and further away from Pugin's intentions. We have registrations for a japanned Gothic coal vase, a Gothic pickle bottle, and a Gothic door for a bird cage, literally going from the sublime to the ridiculous. Owen Jones was another key figure in the design reform movement. He was a leading architect and designer who was asked to decorate the interior of the 1851 Great Exhibition building. He was also a key figure in the founding of the South Kensington Museum, later the V&A, along with Henry Cole. He travelled widely, researching different styles of design, and was particularly inspired by Islamic designs, as we can see from the names of some of these wallpapers. Jones's book, The Grammar of Ornament, published in 1856, attempted to categorise types of design by style and period and became hugely influential. His design principles became part of the teaching framework for the schools of design. He developed a whole language of design, one element of which, like Pugin, was that all ornament should be based on geometric construction. Jones's design precepts differed from Pugin's in that he was motivated by commercial as well as aesthetic concerns, and one of his aims was to improve the status of British decorative art overseas. We have many examples of his wallpaper designs at the National Archives. These ones were registered by John Trumbull and Company. Owen Jones was particularly influenced by Islamic design and led the way in the Victorian revival of what was termed the Moorish style in architecture and decoration. Jones was given joint responsibility with Matthew Digby Wyatt for the decoration and layout of the new Crystal Palace at Sydenham in 1854. They designed a series of fine arts courts which would take the visitor through a tour of the history of design and ornament. Jones built a recreation shown here of the Alhambra Palace in Spain, which he had visited years earlier and which had greatly influenced his theories on design. He also designed the Egyptian, Greek and Roman courts. By the 1890s, ordinary domestic interiors were being filled with Eastern promise, probably not quite in the way Owen Jones envisaged. This was partly due to the influence of the department store Liberty's, which set up a furnishing and decoration studio in 1883, initially specialising in Moorish furniture and imported latticework. Around 1860, ideas about the links between fine and decorative art began to change in a way that had a profound effect for the development of style. The activities of art furnishers promoted a new attitude towards design by producing furniture and other decorative items that had an artistic content. At first, this was a minority taste promoted by people like William Morris and the Pre-Raphaelites, but by the end of the century, the term artistic had become a signal of the latest in design, led by the idea that art and artistic feeling are as much shown in the design of furniture and other items for the home as the fine arts of sculpture and painting. Morris was also a key campaigner in the movement to reform design and was strongly influenced by Pugin. Like Pugin, he associated good design with moral values and believed in the intrinsic value of hand craftsmanship, the value of art for everyone, the importance of pleasure in work and the democratization of work. He always regretted that his handmade methods inevitably meant that his products were only ministering to the swinish luxury of the rich. I'm not sure how well that would have gone down with his wealthier clients. Morris and Company fought against contemporary commercialism and aimed to produce every type of furniture and furnishing. The National Archives holds at least 50 William Morris samples, including Trellis, shown here, which was the first wallpaper designed by Morris, Marshall, Faulkner & Co., set up by Morris with the Pre-Raphaelites. The original design was on display at the recent Pre-Raphaelites exhibition at Tate Britain. Trellis was designed by Morris for the Red House, and the birds were drawn by the architect Philip Webb. We also hold a number of original Morris & Co. designs, including the furniture fabric design on the left. These are 4 more samples of William Morris wallpapers and fabrics held at the National Archives. Daisy was also registered by Morris, Marshall, Faulkner & Co. and was the first wallpaper by the company actually to be put into production. The design was inspired by a 15th century illuminated manuscript and reflects the influence of Pugin's medievalism. Along with one of Morris's most popular designs, pomegranates, they also demonstrate his interest in naturalism in ornament. The official disapproval of the direct imitation of nature didn't extend to all use of natural ornament, and it was considered appropriate if the design reflected the natural behaviour of plants. It's easy to see why the public got confused and needed so many advice books. The 19th century was a period when colour schemes changed rapidly. Crimson had been the height of fashion, then peacock blues, magenta and pink came into vogue with the advent of new dyeing technologies. Other fleeting colour fashions were known as Britannia violet, Manchester yellow, Manchester brown and the tempting-sounding London dust. But William Morris and the advent of the aesthetic movement brought softer colours into fashion. Just as an aside, interior decoration at this period carried with it some risks. As well as lead-in paint, many wallpapers were made from dyes containing poisonous materials. Green wallpapers were particularly dangerous as they were made with an arsenic base. The historian Judith Flanders suggests that this is why a change of air often worked well for invalids. They were being slowly poisoned at home and felt better once they were away. Recent research on a sample of William Morris's trellis wallpaper suggests that despite his careful manufacturing methods, even the green dye used in the stems contained arsenic. Nowadays we associate William Morris with the arts and crafts movement, but this term was not actually coined until the 1880s when the Guild of Handicrafts was formed. Morris was president of the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society from 1893 to 1896, the year of his death. His wallpapers and fabrics were also hugely popular with followers of the aesthetic movement. Whereas William Morris and his followers still associated good design with moral values and the belief that exposure to beauty could exert an improving moral influence, the aesthetic movement championed art for art's sake. Its followers believed that art, in which they included decorative items for the home, didn't need to have any underlying moral purpose, but only needed to be beautiful. The wallpaper shown on the top left by Bruce Talbot won a gold medal at the International Exhibition in Paris in 1878. Talbot was one of the most prolific and influential designers of the aesthetic movement, designing furniture and metalwork as well as wallpapers and fabrics. We have a number of samples of his designs at the National Archives. This peacock wallpaper by Walter Crane was registered by the art wallpaper company Jeffrey & Co., which used a version of it as their logo. The sideboard shown on the top right has become one of the most famous pieces of 19th century furniture. Its geometric form and plain ebonized surfaces continue to appeal to modernists throughout the 20th century. It demonstrates the influence of Japanese art and design on British decorative art, especially in the 1860s and 1870s, as does the ebonized chair designed by Godwin. We have the original design for this, which was registered by the cabinet maker William Watt. There are many examples of the work of what became known as art designers among the registered designs. This could be because copyright became a hotly contested issue again by the 1870s, with the rise of named designers who equated their work with fine art and were keen to keep control of their work. Registering designs was one way of doing this. The books of representations are full of designs that use the aesthetic movement symbols of sunflowers, peacocks, blue and white china, and Japanese fans. This artistic approach to design was eclectic and was heavily influenced by Japanese traditions. Its followers included the artists James McNeill Whistler and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and the designers Bruce Talbot, E.W. Godwin, Christopher Dresser, and Walter Crane. Many of the key avant-garde architects and designers interested themselves not only in working for wealthy clients, but also in the reform of design for the middle-class home. Although to us a room decorated with William Morris designs might look a little overwhelming, it created the opposite impression at the time and was considered to be an indication of subdued good taste. Writers on interior design recommended papers in quiet or subdued colours, but which were rich yet grave or calm yet cheerful. The photograph here is of the dining room at Linley Sambourne House at 18 Stafford Terrace in Kensington. The Sambournes were a prosperous middle-class family. Linley Sambourne was a cartoonist for Punch magazine, and the house is one of the best surviving examples of a Victorian middle-class home decorated in the aesthetic style. Although Sambourne parodied the movement in his cartoons, his own house was full of fashionable trappings. The walls are decorated with William Morris's very popular wallpaper design, Pomegranate. We can't see it very clearly here, but the advice was to divide the wall into 3 sections with different but complementary patterns in the dado, filling and frieze. Broadly speaking, the aesthetic interior contained far fewer ornaments and less furniture than had been customary in the middle of the century, although as we can see here, the rooms were still very full by our standards. In the aesthetic home, heavily carved furniture, large mirrors in gilt frames, white ceilings and bright colours were considered vulgar, while shades of soft green, blue and white porcelain, Japanese fans and peacock feathers and William Morris wallpaper were the mark of an artistic home. Incidentally, Linley Sambourne House is open for guided tours if anyone would like to go and see it. The aesthetic style was hugely popular and was promoted by well-known names, notably Oscar Wilde, who wrote and gave lectures on the subject of the house beautiful, famously saying, "I find it harder and harder every day to live up to my blue china." But despite being satirised in the press, the style remained popular until the end of the 19th century. Christopher Dresser was a radical and pioneering designer and a close associate of Owen Jones. He was educated and lectured at the London School of Design and wrote extensively on the subject. In 1855 he became Professor of Artistic Botany in the Department of Science and Art, and many of his designs illustrate his interest in organic plant forms. Dresser produced startlingly modern-looking ceramic and metalwork designs, as well as a large number of wallpapers and textiles. Although he was a contemporary of William Morris, he differed from Morris in that he embraced new technologies and designed for industrially based manufacturers, making full use of the latest techniques of mass production. He's sometimes referred to as the father of industrial design. However, he shared Morris's belief in the moral potential of design, believing that ornamentation was a fine art that should ennoble and elevate our fellow creatures. Dresser designed utilitarian objects for the general public. His most innovative designs were for objects to be made in metal, like this teapot on display at the V&A, which isn't at all what most of us picture when we think of Victorian design. His designs for metalwork objects are often completely abstract shapes. By contrast, his designs for ceramics and glass often resemble plant forms in their shape. The shape of this vase is sometimes called double gourd. The vase was made by James Cooper and Sons in Glasgow and was sold exclusively through Liberty's, which registered it in 1888. Dresser's central idea was of fitness or adaptation to purpose, and he believed it was possible to produce artistic objects that were entirely without ornament, a revolutionary concept. Dresser complained in the 1870s that designs were appearing under his name which were not his work, which may explain why he registered a number of his designs, including textiles, wallpapers, metalwork, ceramics and glassware. Along with Bruce Talbot and Christopher Dresser, Walter Crane was one of the key designers associated with both the aesthetic and arts and crafts movements, as well as being one of the driving forces behind design reform. He became the first president of the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society, formed in 1887, and head of the Royal College of Art in 1897. He began designing wallpapers in 1874 after his name was suggested to Metford Warner, the director of Jeffrey & Co., by the designer Bruce Talbot. He subsequently became one of Jeffrey & Co.'s most important designers. As well as wallpapers, he designed textiles, stained glass and ceramics. Crane was a campaigning socialist who believed passionately that handicrafts were equal in beauty and value to what were termed the fine arts, as we can see from this quote from his introduction to the catalogue of the first Arts and Crafts exhibition of 1888. He said, "The true root and basis of all arts lies in the handicrafts. If there is no room or chance of recognition for really artistic power and feeling in design and craftsmanship, if art is not recognised in the humblest object and material and felt to be as valuable in its own way as the highly rewarded pictorial skill, the arts cannot be in a sound condition. If artists cease to be found among the crafts, there is great danger that they will vanish from the arts also and become manufacturers and salesmen instead." These are two of Crane's earliest designs for wallpaper, created in 1875. They demonstrate his imaginative use of flat pattern design, which he recommended for wallpapers. The stylised forms of the swans are suggestive of Greek vase paintings, which influenced his style at this time. Swan, rush and iris was designed as a dado, with iris and kingfisher intended as the filling or main section of wallpaper. By the 1870s, the English had become world leaders in terms of the quantity of wallpaper sold and were also winning awards for design. Walter Crane, William Morris, Bruce Talbot and Christopher Dresser were much admired abroad, especially in the United States, and their work came to be identified with a distinctive English school of decoration. Walter Crane was well known as an illustrator of children's books, and he was asked by Jeffrey & Company to design a series of wallpapers for children. Froggy He Would A Wooing Go, registered in 1877, was particularly popular. he designed figurative, often narrative wallpapers, drawing on Greek myth, fairy tales and nursery rhymes. Almond Blossom and Swallow was intended as a frieze and was exhibited at the International Exhibition, Paris, in 1878, where it was awarded a gold medal. The design is suggestive of Japanese art, very popular at this time. Peacocks and Amorini, a more formal design, was used by William Morris in his commission to redecorate parts of St James's Palace. The arts and crafts movement was associated with moral and political theories, as well as a return to traditional craftsmanship. It was an approach to manufacture as well as style, and developed in the 1880s as a group of artists and designers came together to share their ideas. The movement was heavily influenced by the theories of William Morris, who, as I mentioned, was president of the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society for the 3 years up to his death in 1896. The movement had a strong socialist element, championing the rights of craftsmen to be properly rewarded and their skills appreciated. Members of the movement turned away from huge factories and set up small workshops which concentrated not on speed and economy, but on the practical skills of the workers and the pleasure derived from craftsmanship. Like Pugin before them, the movement believed that the architecture and interior design of a building should form a cohesive whole. Their furniture design stressed honesty of production, with structural features often becoming the focal point of the decoration. At the end of the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century, we can begin to see the development of the curved, flowing lines and sinuous shapes that the style shared with Art Nouveau. This spoon was designed by Archibald Knox for Liberties, possibly to celebrate the coronation of Edward VII. Knox's work has been described both as arts and crafts and Art Nouveau, illustrating the difficulties of trying to categorise designs. This unassuming-looking stool was also registered by Liberties and became something of a design classic, selling in huge numbers. The textiles you see here also show the move away from formal geometric patterns towards far more free-flowing designs. So, were the 1835 Select Committee's recommendations followed, and was design reform successful? By the end of Victoria's reign, attitudes towards the decorative arts had changed. The concept of art manufactures had elevated the status of the decorative arts. Design came to be recognised as an art form. Countless books and journals on the subject were being devoured by the public. The British reputation for design improved, and the market for British decorative items, both at home and overseas, was huge. The work of the aesthetic and arts and crafts designers was especially popular. The Museum of Ornamental Art at Marlborough House and subsequently the South Kensington Museum were revolutionary in the way they made design accessible to the working classes. When the South Kensington Museum opened in 1857, Henry Cole, its first director, stated that the museum should be a schoolroom for everyone. It was the first public institution to try to educate students, manufacturers and the general working public through its collections of decorative art. The museum was also revolutionary in that it was open 6 days a week and opened until 10 o'clock in the evening 3 days a week, so that working people could visit after work. There was free admission on 3 days a week, and from the beginning the museum arranged travelling exhibitions to industrial towns and cities so that its holdings could be more widely appreciated. The Copyright Acts also helped to improve the status of design, raising awareness of the damage done by copying designs and encouraging investment in skilled designers. The huge number of designs registered, over 400,000 between 1842 and 1883, along with the fact that the work of many of the art designers was registered, is an indication that registration of designs must have been seen as worthwhile. By 1882, the Government School of Design had moved to South Kensington, where it had grown into the National Art Training School. It was renamed the Royal College of Art in 1896. It was the hub for 7 schools in London and 150 across the country. Artisans and would-be designers flocked to the National School and its branches. Trying to assess to what extent the taste of the general public changed is very difficult. Certainly a large swathe of the middle classes embraced the work of the art designers, and there was also a more general interest in the decoration of the home across the social classes. However, a look through the registered designs suggests that there was still a considerable market for designs that would not have been approved of by the design reformers. The calls for reform in Victorian design were originally driven by commercial concerns, but the raised awareness of the importance of good design that this prompted led to an amazing outpouring of creativity and an unprecedented level of interest in design. We've looked at the work of several of the most important figures in the design reform movement, and I hope the talk has also shown what an amazing resource the registered designs are for the study of design history. If anyone is interested in doing some further reading, I can recommend these 3 books. Inside the Victorian Home by Judith Flanders gives a fascinating insight into Victorian domestic life and the social importance of home decoration. Jeremy Cooper's Victorian and Edwardian Furniture and Interiors and Michael Snowdin and John Styles' Design and the Decorative Arts both give a very good introduction to the decorative arts in the Victorian period. Thank you.
This talk was recorded on the 31st of January 2013 at the National Archives, Kew. This talk was sponsored by the Friends of the National Archives. This podcast is copyrighted the National Archives. All rights reserved.